So you're just ready to get rolling here? I'm ready to go if you
Oh,
are.
I'm ready to go.
Dude, let's do this. Franklin Swann, I'm super excited to have you on. We had a conversation a few weeks back, which has flown by, actually. We started to talk a little bit, and I was like, wow, okay, this story is going to be perfect for my podcast. Can't wait to hear more. Can't wait to dive deeper into this. So, Franklin, thank you for joining me on my podcast. This is a really special episode. It's a great timing for me personally. Well, how you doing over there in Texas?
I'm doing great. I'm just very grateful to be here this morning. Um, I'm just excited to be here. So
I love
doing
hearing
awesome.
that. Thank you. I love hearing that. And let's do this. Franklin, what is your mission? I want to start off by that. Just what is your mission in life right now?
I've been on a real journey these past few years just to really bring some. I mean, talking about the podcast we're on, you look back at it. I've really been on this pursuit of just being able to become a healthy, happy man who can show up and love his family and create some value in the world and hopefully impact a few men to be able to find their way to show up for their families. And I just want to serve and hopefully make this world a little bit better place while I'm here.
That's wonderful. And so yeah, you're the host of the World Needs a Man podcast. I want to tout that for you. But at the same time, if you are a woman listening to this, don't turn this off because this is a conversation I think is going to be great for both men and women. You have quite a journey to share. You sound like you're in a great place right now. You said you're in a great place right now, which I'm super happy to hear. But I'm familiar with some of your journey from what you shared and also listened to your podcast as well. You came from a really difficult, tough place. How deep do you want to go with this? Are you ready to go deep with this?
I'll go as deep as you want to go. I would call it dark.
Yeah,
I would call it a very dark space.
yeah.
And and yeah, I'll take you through the whole story. But I mean, today, it just the level of gratitude that I'm able to feel from moment to moment, just the appreciation. I mean, even ordering a coffee at a coffee shop, I'm able to engage and just try to bring a little joy into the person's life that's pouring my coffee that morning. All the way from that to taking my kids to school, playing with them, connecting with my wife, enjoying what I do and the value I create in my business. Um, and just realizing that happiness is really possible. Happiness is something that I think we all deserve. Happiness is something that when we can find it, and I think happiness is a bit of an inside job, and it
Mm.
starts inside of us. And when we can find that and when we can embrace it, we just get to be better human beings for the people around us that get to interact with us every day. And so there's just a lot of like purpose behind. And I speak through my podcast to men, but it's anybody. I think we have a responsibility and obligation to figure out how to be healthy human beings, just so that we can serve other people around us better.
Mm. I love that. I've been doing this for 150 plus episodes. I think that's the first time I've heard happiness described as that. So really appreciate you sharing that. And you would know. I'm really interested to ask questions along the journey that you're about to share with us about
Hmm.
like how you did this inside work. And because I think those are like that's the secret sauce, right? Those are the tools, those are the keys you can help share with others. Like a lot of people are in a dark place, they're in a difficult place, they're anxious, they're feeling a lot of shame and guilt, which I've dealt with a lot recently, and they just can't get out of it. They're in that dark place, and you dug yourself out, and I
Dug
think
myself out.
that's pretty incredible. And when I say dark place, when you say dark place, it's dark.
Yeah.
It's dark.
Well, I'll just take us there. How
Yeah.
about that? So
Take us to a dark place,
yeah, I'll take us
Franklin.
to a dark place. So 2016, I looked up and as I look back and you you can't see that you're in a dark space when you're in the dark space. It's
Mm,
almost like you have to get some perspective on it and find that healing and create some distance between where you were and where you are now to be able to truly just understand how bad things were. And if you look back at my life, I've got a beautiful family. I've got amazing kids, a gorgeous wife that I adore. I run a very successful business. Pretty fit guy, and I'm healthy and in shape. I've got good friends. Like from the outside, everyone would have been like, "Well, what do you have to complain about?
Hmm.
What do you mean you're having a hard time? What do you mean, you're in a dark space? Everything looks great." And what I've found is there's a lot of men that can resonate with this whole idea that I've achieved all these things, I've checked all the boxes, and yet why do I feel this way? Why do I feel this emptiness, this frustration, confusion inside? And I can't explain it. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know who to talk to about it. I feel a bit of um, judgment and shame in society because it's not real, it's not considered real masculine to be vulnerable and to
Hmm.
share that stuff. But um my life looked great, but yet I what I have discovered and realized is when I hit a rock bottom in 2016, I was in a deep pit of simply having massive self-hate. Just when I would look in the mirror, I couldn't see any value in who I was. I didn't have any love, gratitude, appreciation for myself. All I felt was anger. And that was the end result of a long decline into that space. So I'll rewind and take us back. So grew up in Tyler, Texas, had a great childhood, just very active, lots of friends. I went to school, went to college, met my wife studying abroad, and we get married after school, and so we go into the work, and I got a job in commercial real estate. She was in staffing, and I don't know if you know anything about commercial real estate, but you pretty much are going to starve for a while before you start making anything. And so the first year I had a very small draw, and the second year I spent the whole time paying that draw back. So the net effect of my income production over the first 2 years in the workforce, but more importantly, being married, was zero.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what I didn't realize at the time was that there was this sense of worthlessness and really frustration that began to grow inside of me because I felt fundamentally like I was a man who couldn't provide for his new wife. I couldn't support my family, and for me, that was just something that was very important and very fundamental to me seeing value in myself as a human being. And no matter, and I was working so hard. I was working weekends sometimes. I was at the office early. I was there late, working very hard, and yet it just didn't seem to be working out. And I just began to have this resentment towards myself begin to build. And so we were in Dallas for a couple of years, but then we wanted to move home, start a family, and I'm from a smaller town, so we moved back, and I actually joined our family business. It's a very old company. We've been this year is 129 years in business. I'm the fifth generation, which is an anomaly, and I never realized until I had the opportunity to really look back on it, the pressure that comes from stepping into a legacy business like that and having multiple generation pressure basically placed on your shoulders, whether it's intentional or not. It's just there.
Hmm.
And so I come into this business, I'm bringing with me this sense of worthlessness and an inability to provide. I step into a business that adds a massive amount of pressure to my plate. Uh, my wife and I were going through IVF, having a hard time having a family, and being in and trying to figure out how to run this business, which got a business degree, but the
Was this a
reality,
job? Was this a job you wanted, or were you still kind of like reluctant, like, I don't even really want to do this in the first place? Or did you feel an obligation to your family? Like, what were your thoughts about stepping into this role?
I think a piece of me felt a little obligation. I think a piece of me felt like I'm not, I'm not able to do anything with my current job where I'm
Yeah.
at. And so this is a different opportunity to step into. And it was in '08. And so it actually ended up being a good timing from a real estate perspective for sure to get into the family business.
Hmm.
I love what I do now. Like what I do now, building teams, strategy, um, growing our culture, leadership. Like I am very good at what I do and I enjoy what I do very much. But at the time when I made the decision to move, I think it was a lot more out of desperation, in,
Yeah.
subconsciously, than it was, I truly want to get back into the business.
Yeah.
But so I get back in and man, there's no school for how to handle the pressure that I felt. There's no way to describe it other than to describe what began to happen to me.
Was there, okay, so listen to your podcast the other day. I'm going to ask you questions along your journey if you don't
Please,
mind. Was this
please.
internal pressure? Was this external pressure? Was this kind of like a story you were telling yourself that it just put so much pressure on yourself?
Such a good question. I believe the majority of it was internal.
Yeah.
I mean, there's naturally going to be external pressure in coming into something like this. I think
Mhm.
no matter what business it is, I mean, there are pros and cons to family business, and I just didn't have the capacity and the skill to understand how to deal with that pressure. The pressure was There was nothing wrong with the pressure other than it was beyond my capacity to handle. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I also
So,
want I want people to also realize you and your wife are going through the IVF process at the same time, which
yep.
I'm not familiar with personally, but I do know people have gone through that and they say how stressful it is, how expensive it is. So you got to pay those bills as well.
Hmm.
So I know you kind of said that. I don't want people to gloss over that because I can imagine you're dealing with the stress at work every day, and then you come home and it's like there is stress at home. It's not like, oh, everything's perfect at home too. It's like
Yep.
that's a very stressful situation as well.
I appreciate you pointing that out because it is, and I don't think we realized it at the time, but it is. It's very stressful, emotionally heavy,
Yeah.
and it's just another weight. So we've got, we're trying to have a family. We go through some miscarriages along that journey. I mean, it was very difficult, and my wife is just a rock star. She handled it so well, but man, was it hard.
Hmm.
It
I
was
imagine.
just it was hard. So navigating the personal side, navigating the professional side, um, and so we're in the business. We're going through these challenges. We actually decide to build a new building. We just have one location, but it's a big store. We're about a 50,000 foot building, and we actually in that time frame, like around 2011, decide to build a new building and move our store and move our location. So in 2012 is when we open, and we did finally have a successful IVF. My wife got pregnant with our first son, and what rolled into from those two challenges rolled into opening a new business and having our first child within about 2 weeks of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And moving the business alone was kind of the equivalent of birthing a child as well from just a demand standpoint. So I get to this place where I really feel unequipped to run the company. Um, and there's the stress and the pressure of opening this new business. At the same time, I have my new son that I'm trying to be there for. And so what happens is when I'm at work, there's this guilt that I carry that I'm not at home because I took very little time off. One of my biggest regrets that I didn't like stand up for this, but I took very little time off when he was born to be there and to be home with him, and I was in the business. And but then when I was at home, there was this stress and anxiety that existed that I wasn't in the business getting it up and running because, um, I mean, it's just a lot when that's on your shoulders. And we didn't have good operating systems. We didn't have procedures and ways of doing things. We just kind of did things the way we did them, the way we've always done them. But there wasn't a playbook, so to speak. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to kind of have to just figure it all out on my own to a very large degree. So the what ended up happening was I developed this. There was so much stress, anxiety on inside of me. No one knew this, but what I would do every day is I'd bring a backpack to work. I would have 4 or 5 undershirts in that backpack because my body was sweating from the anxiety so bad that as soon as I woke up in the morning, it was like waterworks that I would start sweating. And so I would have to change out my undershirt every couple of hours just so people didn't see giant sweat marks going all the way down my the sides of my shirt.
Did
And
your wife know this, or did you kind of keep this private from her too?
she knew it, but I've thought a lot about this because I feel like it's kind of a frog in water kind of analogy where you're so bad, but you don't even realize it. You don't even recognize it. And there's so much on the mental side and especially the subconscious mind end of this going on that you're not even aware of just how bad things are because it just feels normal,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like if you're sick all the time and you get to this place where being sick feels normal, but it's not, but you don't recognize it because you're so used to it. So,
Mm-hmm.
so, but at the same time, I didn't have any, like, I'm sitting there bringing these undershirts to work, ch- closing the door to my office every couple of hours, changing, trying to hide and mask this pressure I felt and having no answer for how do I deal with this. I just hadn't have anything. So my answer became, and looking back, realizing, so I had a few rules. One was, I think internally, like I can't go just drown this away in some sedation. I'm not going to go just crawl inside of a bottle. I can't take this out on my family. So what I started doing was marathons and start running 26-mile races. And really, I think that was an unconscious way of trying to just deal with the stress and get it out. So I started doing marathons, and pretty soon I got a few of those under my belt, and it was like, well, this isn't really working. So I'll just turn up the heat. So then I started training for ultra marathon. So I did a couple of 50-mile races. Those were, instead of being on the road, those were through the trails and through woods, and it would take about 10 hours to complete. And I would go on 3 and 4 hour training runs, just running myself into the ground. I looked fit at that time, but there's no way my body wasn't redlining with what I was trying to put it through. And so I was just going out and running, trying to run from probably and run out all of that stress. But I got a couple of those done, and then that still wasn't quite working. So I thought, well, I just need to keep making this harder. It must be that I just need to push my body even harder and put it through even more torture. So I started signing up for these kind of extended boot camp things that are run by former special forces guys. The first was a program called Go Ruck, where a couple of Green Berets show up and you've got about a 50-pound pack on. And I signed up for a 24-hour event. So 24 hours straight of having this pack on,
Wow.
covering ground, moving distance. Um, and You're carrying logs and sandbags and doing physical training and getting wet. And it's miserable and some of the hardest stuff I've ever done. But I do the 24-hour event, and they had a 12 and a 6 hour event behind those two. And so I decided to stick around for all three. And so I ended up doing basically almost 48 hours of this PT with these incredible Green Berets that led us the whole time, and just beat the snot out of myself through that. Right, just again, just trying to prove, just trying to like feel, just trying to get the stress out. So got done with that, and I signed up for another event called SEAL Fit Kokoro Camp. That's run by former SEALs. There's a gentleman, Mark Devine, who's written a lot of books. He's got a podcast, and he had originally designed this program as kind of a prep course for aspiring SEAL candidates. So it's 50 straight hours of simulated Navy SEAL work, like
Mm.
different evolutions. By no means is this Navy SEAL training, but it is very difficult. I ended up having to go into a urgent care after it was over for about 12 hours because I had rhabdo, and they put
Wow.
like 4 liters of IV fluid in me and kind of blew me up and flushed me out. But so I went and did this 50-hour event. So basically woke up on a Friday morning, showed up for the event, and we didn't sleep again until Sunday night. And you find out a few things about yourself
Oh God, yeah.
when you see the sunrise for the second time. Um, but but all of this was just this big effort of me just trying to do more and more to just to feel, to heal, to just try to figure something out. And it honestly is my only answer I had. I didn't have anything better, and it didn't work. And I get to this place. I am so distraught mentally, emotionally. I'm just not being. I can't feel anything. I'm frustrated. I'm confused. I don't like. I just there's such a sense of worthlessness inside of me. And this one night, I step out in my garage, and the best thing I could figure out to do right then was just to ball up my fist and just start beating the shit out of myself.
Yeah,
I was
I heard that
so
last night when I was listening to your podcast, and that was just like that was a wow moment for me.
it it was so dark, and it was so destructive. It was so I felt so helpless and lost, and I was so frustrated with myself, and I had gotten to this place where it went from, I truly believe, this place where I just didn't value myself to where I truly hated myself.
Mm,
I just hated what I'd become. I hated who I was. I had no gratitude for myself. I had no love or appreciation. I was worthless. And because this pressure, you can only suppress for so long. It has to come out somehow. And again, I told you I couldn't take this out on my family. I wasn't going to go
mm.
sedate it away. The work wasn't work, the workouts weren't working. And so finally it's like, well, maybe I'll just take all this out on myself. And that became my outlet. And I would sneak out in the garage. I would hide this from my family, and I would go and I would just go work on myself. And the most ridiculous thing about this is I found that I don't really brood. And so it wouldn't really matter how hard I would hit myself or how terrible that would be. Uh, couldn't see it.
I'm just I can't help but think that this is one step away from just ending everything.
Yeah, yeah. It is 100% on that path. So I I had my first wake up call with it is I'm doing this, trying to hide it, but there's energy, right? There's this energetic thing that this is becoming, and man, it was so dark. When you do something, I mean, I've recognized it is basically a form of self harm that you just couldn't see, but the emotional hangover, as I will call it, that would come from that was devastating from an emotional standpoint. It felt like I could feel the emotional darkness that would leave on me for several days, sometimes after that.
Mm,
And so I'm in my home one night. I just walk in. I think just from work. I see my son. He's like 3 now, and he's walking across the living room, and I see him get mad at himself, and I see him hit himself, and I just stop dead in my tracks, and I think, oh God, I'm bringing this in my home. Like, the thing I'm hiding, I am transferring to my son and my family energetically. They're not
mm.
seeing it, but they're receiving it. They're picking it up, and it's showing up right in front of me. And that just crushed my heart. But I just still didn't have an answer, right? I still didn't have an answer. So it didn't stop yet. So it wasn't long after that, though. I'm back out in the garage, just still confused, angry, frustrated. And all of a sudden, this voice comes to me as clear as day. And it was in my heart, in my ears, on my mind. And it had a very simple question. It said, "What's next?" what's next? And just as you alluded to a second ago, like I knew very clearly the answer to that question. I knew that
Mm,
if I did not change the trajectory I was on, somehow that I would be looking up and I'd have a gun in my hand or something terrible was going to happen. Like there was just no way that it wouldn't progress to that at some point. And I believe with all of my heart that God stepped in that moment, found me in the darkest place I'd been ever been in. And in that space, he was able to speak to me and get my attention. And it brought two things to my realization. Number one, realizing and coming to grips with where I was going in this. But the second thing it also told me was I have a choice.
mm,
What's next means there's a choice. It's not inevitable.
mm,
You're not doomed and just hopeless in this. Like there's another way. And so right then and there, I just refused to accept that this was going to be how my life was going to be. I still didn't know how, what the path was, how to get out of that space, but I refused to accept it anymore. So there was a decision made in that moment of realization of God calling me out and going, look, like you're going to have to make some decisions here because the path you're on, the destruction you are bringing onto yourself and your family is leading down a very dark place to a very even darker place.
mm,
But I also knew if he was asking me that question, it's like, well, there's also got to be an answer. Like that means that there must be some way out of this pit I find myself in right now.
mhm,
And then all of a sudden, it was like these things begin to come and come into my awareness as potential answers and potential ways of moving forward. And what popped up, and it's amazing because I've heard other men's stories, and it's like they all kind of follow the same pattern. I started finding these coaches and mentors who were able to bring some perspective and bring some tools and bring resources into my life that I could begin, instead of taking destructive action every day, shift everything and begin to take productive actions each day in my life. And I found mentors, I found coaches, and they were able to give me and train me on tools that I was able to put to use every day. And slowly but surely, I restored order to my life. And you fast forward almost a decade now, and when I get home, my little girl loves to hide around a corner and jump out as I'm walking in the door. My son runs up to me and grabs me around the waist and hugs me and says, God, Dad, how was your day? I missed you today. My wife and I, we were on a date not too long ago, and she just looks at me and goes, God, you make me feel so safe. And as a husband, I want my wife to feel loved, but I think even deeper, if there's not a sense of safety in my home, then I kind of got nothing as a husband. And so the fact that she feels safe, when she feels safe, she can feel loved.
mm,
So I'm a man who has found health so that he can be a great husband and father. I come into my business, it is thriving. My team is thriving. I mean, yes, we're successful financially, but from just an operational standpoint and looking at the culture that we've built, look at the way we operate now. There is no I mean, there's pressure, but I have grown my capacity so much far further past the pressure that the business is that it's easy now.
oh,
And it wasn't because I found some new marketing answer or some new, just business idea. All this boils down to the restoration of my physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. It was, as I said earlier, this was like an inside job. And I went to work, I did the work, I became ruthlessly committed to doing the practices every day that, for, one way or another, it just, I look at my life today and where I'm at, and there could not be a more stark difference between who I see in the mirror and how proud I am of the man that I see looking back at me, how much I have grown to appreciate who I am, value who I am, love who I am. And underneath all of that, be able to forgive myself.
Mm.
You could take everyone in the world who has ever done something bad to me, and all combined would never come close to the destruction that I've brought on myself. And there was this
Wow.
piece of me where I truly had to restore a relationship with myself, and I had to forgive myself, truly. And that's been a process of realization and understanding. Um, but man, there's just been nothing that has allowed me to heal the way that those four things have been, being able to forgive myself, appreciate myself, value who I am as a man, and actually love the man that I see looking me back in the mirror. And to experience that today, and to be a man who has that today, compared to a guy sneaking out in the garage so lost and desperate that all he can figure out to do is beat himself up. It is worlds apart.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. There's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to dive into some questions that I wrote down kind of along the way of your journey. I think one of the questions that comes up to my mind is like, when did you share with your wife like all of this was happening?
There was a point my wife told me that she had resigned herself to the fact that she was going to have to carry the family emotionally. And I was hiding this from my, I mean, there was so much shame and guilt wrapped up in this,
Mm,
not just in the action, but in who I was, because I felt so unworthy as a man, so unworthy as a provider and a leader. And I felt ashamed. And, um,
Did
and
you
I was
grow up in
hiding.
an environment of did you grow up in an environment of shame and guilt? Or was this kind of something you brought on yourself?
I think, um, unintentionally, yes. Not like there was never like I had a great childhood in many respects. But I think everyone has some level of trauma or something that
Mm,
they've got from childhood. I mean, I think that's just a normal part of growing up. The problem is not whether you have a traumatic experience in childhood or not. It's the fact that we're not given the tools and the resources to understand how to heal those things and grow
mhm,
from them and take them and turn them into something that serves us versus, destroys us, you know?
mhm.
And so I think there was some carryover, but this really was deepened massively, uh, once I got married, and it was this downward descent, and it was so slow though, and I was so unaware, truly unaware of what it was. I wouldn't have known how to even explain how I felt. I wouldn't have known what to even say, and I, I went to a therapist one time, and they're like, "Well," after about 5 minutes, they said, "Well, we can write you a prescription." And I got out and left,
Mm,
because that was not going to be my answer. I was not going to just cover this up with drugs.
mhm,
Um, I knew that there was more inside of me. I knew that this, like, something intuitively was telling me, this is not who God has made you to be.
mm,
This is not the lot that God has for you in life. You were created in the image of God. I'm a Christian, so I believe Jesus died on the cross for my sins. If he did that, I don't believe he did that for a worthless human being.
mm,
I believe God looks at us just like children, whether you believe in God or not. Like, I just had this sense that, in this intuition, there's got to be more. But I didn't even know what to say to my wife. I mean, there's shame and guilt in the fact that I couldn't do that today. Like, there was just so much in that. And what I learned was the most dangerous pain men can have is the pain they hide.
Mm,
Because when you hide it, then you can't, you're not feeling it. When you can't feel, you can't heal. If you can't heal, you can't be happy. So you're just, if you don't have any kind of support and way out, you just end up cycling inside of this place of guilt, shame, and worthlessness, and you can't get out of it, and you don't know where the door is, and you don't know how you got there. You don't know what the answers are to get out. And it's really confusing and really just not just depressing, but it can feel really hopeless
mm.
when you're in that space.
I really appreciate like the experience that you have and talking from a place of that experience. I hate that you went through that, but it means just so much more knowing that you went through all this and dug yourself out. I can't help I need to ask you this question because I feel at age 22 you had some unfair expectations of yourself. I could be wrong, but I feel like you had the expectation of you're gonna get a job, you're gonna make money, you're gonna get married, you're gonna support your family, all this stuff. And you didn't live up to them, which I feel like caused
Mhm.
all this anxiety and this pressure.
Mhm.
If you could talk to yourself, the 22-year-old self, Franklin, what would you tell him?
Yeah, I was 24 when we got married.
Okay.
So a couple of years after that, you bring up such a great point. My personality is very much high achiever, you know, like never, I'd get done with a marathon and I'd take about 5 steps past the finish line. And it's like, well, what's next? And
Hmm.
there's that what's next thing coming up. It was just, it was always trying to seek validation and approval and worthiness and all externally and outside of myself. And being able to realize, hey, be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. It my the one of the coaches that I work with right now, we look at it this way. There's high achievement in which you get all the accolades, you check all the boxes, you win all the awards, you achieve all the promotions and positions, and those are all external. But then there's the high performer. And this is someone who, of course, achieves things, but it's not from this external standpoint, it's from an internal standpoint. And there's capacity and there's an ability to have sustainability, and it's an internal thing. It's intrinsic, it's inspirational when you're a high performer, and it's not seeking the approval of everybody. Rather, it's seeing the worth and the value that's inside of you inherently, and being grateful for that, and just being able to be in this place of health so that you can simply go serve the world in the way that God has uniquely created you to be able to do that.
Mm. The word I keep coming back to in my mind is identity. I feel like when you're in your 20s, you were just searching for an identity, you just could not find it. And I can't help but think like my conversation with you right now is you are very clear in your identity, very clear.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so am I right? So like I want to talk through that because I feel like people go through these bouts of anxiety and depression
Mhm,
because they just lose their identity. They can't find it or they lose it.
mhm.
Um, being a child of a codependent parental relationship that is now ended in divorce. I have a parent that is extremely codependent, lost their identity, and it's just years later still an issue. I've talked about this on my podcast before, and I see that putting your identity in somebody else or something else. Um, I would love to just hear your experience and expertise on putting your identity in something external, kind of what you were just talking about, and now being very grounded in who you are internally to find your identity and like the confidence that comes from that.
Yeah, there's so many directions I can go with that. Talking back to that younger version of myself, I think there's another piece where it's just like wanting to go back and wrap that young man up and just be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry.
Mm,
I'm so sorry you weren't given the tools to understand how to navigate, because it was really probably a sense of hopeless, helpless, like, I'm expected to do all these things, or and that may not have been external. That could have just been my own internal expectations that I'm unable to meet. And I am have absolutely had to go to war with the perfectionist side of me, and always seeking perfection is absolutely a way to drive yourself crazy. But I could never meet the standard. I could never be good enough. And I think I was always chasing that thing outside of me, but I hadn't been taught, like, hey, you need to appreciate yourself.
Mm.
You need to have some gratitude for yourself. You need to have some love for yourself. You need to be able to forgive yourself for when you mess up or when you do something that doesn't meet your standard. And so, um, it takes time to heal. If you are sick, it takes time to get over that sickness. If you were injured, it takes time to rehab and find healing and restoration. I think with our heart and our mind, it's no different. I think that there's just a process that you have to go through of healing and restoration, um, in order to be able to see the value that's inside of you, the value that is spiritually placed in you, and to just realize in it, why did I have to get to that rock bottom place? Well, I was chasing, 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 and finally it was like, none of this is working. I'm trying to do everything external. So then I began to become aware of, well, maybe there's this internal thing going on that I really have to pay attention to. Maybe it's really about what's inside of me that needs attention, and it's not about the business being on point. It's not about even being a great husband and father, which is very much a part of my purpose. But even before that, fundamentally, if I'm not a healthy man, I will not show up well for my family.
Mm.
Like, if I'm not a healthy man, we will not have a healthy marriage. If we don't have a healthy marriage, we will not have a healthy family. If my family's not healthy, well, the business is not going to be healthy long term. I think that there's a progression and a sequencing to this. And and if you go back to it, I just had to find the health inside of me first before all of these other things were going to be possible. I mean, I had a beautiful marriage, but I was not healthy enough to be able to give my wife what she truly needed.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think, being kind of newly married myself here. You said you didn't want to take it out on your family. I feel like indirectly you probably were, right? Like, you weren't showing up, you weren't your best self, you weren't your happiest self. You were working all these hours just trying to make ends meet. And so you weren't
Mm.
there, like, physically for your family, emotionally for your family. So I can imagine it's not just the pressure that you're, I guess, kind of putting on yourself for achievement, and like work was struggling and stuff like that. Like, I imagine behind the scenes, your marriage is probably also struggling as well, just because you weren't your best version. Your wife is probably like, this isn't the person that I married, right? This isn't matching my expectations of what a marriage should be.
Yeah, I have a personal belief that our wives don't marry the men we are; they marry the men that they know that we can become.
Mm,
And you're 100% right. If I'm not able to show up physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually healthy, well, my wife's not getting the best version of me. She's not getting the version that she deserves, and that I think that she married and that she could see. And she has told me so many times through that, she would say, I just wish you could see yourself the way I see you.
hmm
And she would say that, but there was a piece of me that rejected it and wouldn't look at it and wouldn't allow myself I wouldn't allow myself to consider or receive the possibility that I'm actually a pretty great man. There's a great version of me inside, but I was so addicted to the self-hate. And when you're stuck in self-hate, you create your own a living hell is what you walk around and live in. As much as you try to put a smile on your face uh, and all, there's just a piece of you inside. If you hate yourself, you are naturally, or if you're not well inside, we all project what out externally, what we are internally. If you are full of love and gratitude and self acceptance, and if you are loving life, if you're a happy human being, you're going to project that out onto the world, onto the people around you, and they're going to feel it. And you're going to be that positive influence in their lives that brings life and brings excitement and joy into their world. Talking about you take two different people in line at Starbucks. Well, the first person full of joy and excitement is going to lift up that person's day making their coffee. If the
Hmm.
next one hates themselves, hates who they are, and internally is just bankrupt, there is no way they're going to be able to give at their highest level the love and appreciation and positive energy to that person making their coffee that the other was. It
Well,
just
not only that, you take them down with you. Like negative people just bring you down to their level, and it's just
exactly,
it's the worst. Uh,
exactly.
I can imagine getting out of this self-hate mode that you were in took a lot of really hard conversations with yourself. I think people struggle with looking in the mirror, not liking what they see and who they become, and just having these really hard conversations, but being honest with themselves. Can you kind of tell me about that process?
That was such a critical part of this journey. The first coach that I hired was a one of Tony Robbins' head coaches
Oh shit.
on his staff.
That's cool. Real quick,
And
where did you find these coaches? For people that are like, where the hell do I find a coach? Where did you find
yeah,
them?
you just kind of have to listen. Like I think we are now in a space and in a place where coaching is becoming more and more available and and accessible because you've
Mhm.
got Zoom calls, you've got you can get on a phone call. Like it's not like you're going to see a therapist down the road, and there's nothing wrong with therapy or counseling, but coaching is a little bit of a different dynamic that I have
Mhm.
found very valuable. I would say that I would not be where I am today if I hadn't hired coaches,
Mhm.
plain and simple. Like it is one of the most profound decisions I've ever made. One of the best investments I've ever made was to hire a coach because what they do is bring perspective. You exchange money, you pay them. There's now a responsibility and accountability on them to provide value and on yourself to do work. And they help you to see what you can't. I had to have someone who could come in who was trained, who understood how to help me see what I could not see.
Mhm.
So I have this Tony Robbins coach, and one of the first things, and I tell him my story, and I think he looks at me and thinks, "Wow, I don't know why they give me this guy." But one of the first things he tells me to do, he says, "I want you to buy a book and go read it. It's called Loving What Is." And I look at him, I think, "Loving what is? Come on now. Like, I like to hunt, fish, lift heavy weights. Like, I consider myself somewhat of a masculine man, but loving what is." And I opened this book, and what I realized for the first time in my life was we don't have to believe the thoughts that we think.
Mhm.
Like, and I discovered that I had all these stories. I had all of this old programming going on in my head, all of these stories about myself, about my life, about my family, anything and everything, all of these stories. And it helps you go through this process of dissecting those things and just saying, okay, well, is it true? Number one. And even if it is true, is this story serving you? Because the thing is, we have thousands upon thousands of thoughts that flow through every day. And the problem is not the thoughts we have. The problem is when we attach emotion and meaning to those thoughts and receive them and attach to them to where they become a belief.
Mhm.
When we do that and when we aren't intentional and scrub those for the positive thoughts versus the negative, like I can have two different thoughts about a person. I can think that person's a jerk, or I can have that person is an amazing human being. Both may be true at different times. But the thing is, I can choose which one I'm going to believe. And we are not taught this as kids. We are not given these abilities and resources and tools I think that where things start is the thoughts that run rampant in our mind that we are unable and untrained on how to capture and really have um, go through a process where we're able to turn that story around and either choose to make it positive or choose to just get rid of it altogether. So I read this book and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking all these thoughts. And so I literally get that book. I get a completely empty journal. I go out to a park, find a bench, and I spend the entire day writing out the beliefs and the thoughts and the stories that had been the just programming that was in my mind, the stories that just repeated themselves day after day after day that I couldn't get out of. And I began to go to work. And I
Mm.
began to put those stories down, work through this process. Cause you said, you talk about tough conversations with yourself. That's an easy, like conceptually, it's like, okay, I understand that, but how do I actually do that? Like, what is an actual process and tool I can use to start to confront those stories? So I would write that story down. I would go to work on it, and I would prove to myself that it wasn't even true.
Hmm.
So many of the things I was telling myself when once I got it down on paper and was able to use this tool, is like, oh my gosh, I'm telling myself this story that it's not true. Even if it was, it's causing me stress, anxiety, overwhelm, frustration, anger. And it's like, okay, so who would you be without this story? Like, what do you mean? I can just let this go? Well, I can just begin the process of actually letting this story go. It's like, well, yeah, you can just, who would you be without it? And it's like, well, shoot, I'd be pretty happy. I'd be pretty calm and present and a joyful person. And so then it's like, well, let's find some different versions of this story. And you take the story and you flip it on its head and you say, well, instead of this person's a jerk, well, I'm a jerk. Can you find some proof and evidence for that? And it's like, well, shoot, at the very least, I'm a pretty big jerk to myself sometimes. Got some good proof and evidence to back that up. Or this person's not a jerk. It's like, actually, they were really just overwhelmed. I know they've got a lot on their plate. I know that they're just dealing with a personal issue that anyone would be overwhelmed with. So they're not a jerk. They're just like they were just misunderstood in that moment. So it's unbelievable the way you begin to transform your thinking
Oh yeah.
and replacing these stories that hold you back with stories that empower you. And then when you begin to do this every single day, over time, you literally rewire your mind in the way that you think. And you can even begin to see those stories that pop up that are negative, and you become skilled at it, not even having to go to the paper to do this. You see them before they even attach and go, I know that that's a story that's not going to serve me, and I'm going to go ahead and flip it on its head in my mind.
This is awesome. I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, if this is the root of everything, right? Like you telling yourself stories just drove you to the darkest of places. And if you had the tools to correct it or fix it or anything, get there from the beginning, this never would have happened. It's amazing the story that we all tell ourselves that we just completely make up the narratives, whether it's personal relationships or work, and like this person was mad at me today, or I think they're being snippy with me. And I know I won't go too deep into details like my wife yesterday. Someone was just acting really shitty to her and she was like crying because she like felt she did something wrong. I'm like, listen, like you don't know what's going on in her life. It is always easier also to tell somebody else that than it is to kind of tell yourself that. So I love the fact that it just takes work from what you're saying. It's like a muscle. You got to keep working it out and working it out. That gets easier and easier and easier. But I'm so happy we hit on this because I feel like this is the root of everything.
I mean, think of your mind no different than your body. Um, if you don't go to the gym and feed your body junk food, there will be
Mhm.
a result. And if you do that over a long period of time, there will be a really negative result. On the flip side, if you go to the gym and work out every day, if you put good, healthy nutrition inside your body, I mean, we can all picture this in our mind right now. There's a very different results that you're going to get. Your mind is no different. We go through several decades of our lives receiving thoughts that we attach to as beliefs, and those create the stories that govern our life, and we're not trained how to choose the healthy thoughts, the productive thoughts, the empowering thoughts. We're just taught that whatever thought comes in, we have to take it in as truth. And then when we attach to that thought with emotion, then that's when it anchors in as a belief. And that's when it becomes something. And we'll go into this. So, what we're talking about mostly is conscious mind stuff. Like, I am conscious of these stories that play. And so, it was one of the first steps of having this tool where you can go in and just, like, on a surface level, realize you're telling yourself all these stories. And we aren't taught this. We aren't trained in how to do this. But it is absolutely where everything starts. And our stories create the filter through which we see life. If
Mm,
you look at my situation and where I got to, that was thoughts, stories, and beliefs allowed to run rampant for years that descended and created the reality that I was experiencing. When I told myself for a decade that I was a worthless individual, and you may not have beat yourself up physically, every human being on the planet beats themselves up mentally. There is not a person listening to this podcast that is not taking themselves to task in their own mind. And the result of that is catastrophic from an emotional, mental standpoint. And when you do that over and over and for a lifetime, you can see pretty easily how it's easy for someone to kind of become a miserable human being. That they weren't born that way. They were telling that story and running that movie in their mind for years to create that reality. And then you see somebody else that's just a joyful person. Well, they have really beautiful stories and thoughts going on in their mind that over time create that reality. And so it all starts with our thoughts.
I love it. And this is, I want to hit on the fact too, is like we mentioned about 10 minutes ago about like negative people and stuff like that. Being around positive people, I think, influence like you thinking positive as well. So when you're around people that are just negative Nancy's and see the glass half full, or how much of an influence that plays on your perspective of life. But when you surround yourself with people and family that see things so positive, or oh, not a big deal, everything's going to be fine, or they just go with the flow and everything's okay, like
Mm-hmm.
what a world of difference that is to you personally. I think you're like somebody that I love to be around, because I feel like when I'm struggling or I'm telling myself stories, I feel like you would just lift me up rather than bring me down and say, "Yeah, you're probably right. That person's so mean. They're such a jerk or whatever." So I really think that, just take a moment to highlight like the people that you do surround yourself with really do influence like how you feel and the perspective that you have. So try to surround yourself with the most positive of people. And I know that's not always easy. Sometimes it's the closest people to you that bring you down. So.
Yeah, that you're 100% right. But the more you can become aware of this, right? I had a phone call the other day with a gentleman, and when I got off that call, it's like, man, I don't know what it is, but I feel like the life was just drained out of me.
Mm,
I couldn't explain it, but from an energetic standpoint, it was like I I'm not going to get on the phone ever again with that human being. I don't care what the reason. Like, I'm going to cut that person off because, and this wasn't a close person, but just to illustrate, like, I truly felt drained just from a 3 or 4 minute conversation on the phone with him. And those negative people, they just suck the life out of us. And the more that we can limit, uh, interaction with negative people, the better off we're going to be. And the more that we can do the work so that we bring a positive energy into every conversation environment. Like, when I have a great, when I go through my morning routine and put myself into a really positive and productive state, and then I step in to the kitchen with my wife and my kids in the morning, I have the power and the ability to shift the energy in that room.
mm,
I have the power and ability to shift my children and wife's experience in life and bring that gift to them. I mean, that I don't think we realize one of the most amazing gifts we get to give is the gift of who we are if we are positive people to the people that we love. And we can be that just dose of positivity that they get every single morning.
Wow, what you're saying to me really resonates with me. And now, especially times 20 right now, knowing I'm going to be a dad in 3 weeks probably. Hopefully everything goes well. You said a few things during this whole podcast that really just kind of struck me. Um, wow, like I get a little bit of shivers right there when you're like, hey, you have the power to shift the energy in the room. I think those are like something like to hear that put into words, I think is just kind of like takes me aback a little bit. And seeing how your son was kind of like beating himself up a little bit, like struck me a lot. And you have a relationship now where it seems like your kids are like happy that you're home and they're talking to
Thriving.
you and stuff
Oh, they're
like that,
thriving.
which holy shit, man, that is I want that so bad.
And we're not I mean, there's days where it's a mess trying to get to school, right? I mean, we are
Right.
still human beings. We're not perfect by any stretch, but I think it's the ability, especially like being a dad, to realize that hey, I don't have to jump into the emotional like mess with my kids. I can help shift where we are right now. Like if
Mm,
we get in the car and we're on our way to school, and things just aren't good, like it just wasn't a fun morning getting ready for school, and we've all been there, right? I mean, you'll experience this coming up. I mean, it is what it is, but we don't have to perpetuate it. I'll put on some really positive music. I'll try to bring some really positive conversation. 9 times out of 10, by the time we get to school, the emotional energy in the car has completely shifted. They're giving me a hug on the way out the door. We say a quick prayer. I say a quick prayer over them before they get out of the car, and they're off to their day in a very positive
mm,
state and with a positive mindset. So but it takes intentionality, and it takes doing a few things that I know I need to do in order to shift that and get them off a high center. And I give them that gift.
mm. Is there a tool like you just gave me a tool? Is there like another tool like you would recommend to me being a future dad of like how to get your kids to communicate with you or be positive or just be that light in your life? Like, what are some tools or methods that you would share with me?
So again, I think it starts with us. Like I can't say, well, when my wife does something, then I will do something, or when my kids, or when my boss, or when my team, or when my friends. Like it all starts with me. When I take the time to get myself on point, I'm going to be able to give more to them and
Mm,
influence them in a positive way. Like that's how the energy needs to flow. And so the first thing I will say, and this is for anybody, and I really think, especially for anyone who's in a tough spot right now, I think one of the first really powerful things you can do is get a really productive, positive morning routine in place. The reason I say that, I think of it as triage. It's almost like, hey, let's just stop the bleeding. And that's one of the first things that I found when I started coaching and doing what I do even to this very day. I found some routines and put some things in place that just allowed me to bring a little stability to life, and so that I could begin the work. It's like if there's too much chaos, I'm not going to be able to get the work done. So let me put in some positive actions into my day rather than destructive actions that will give me moving in the right direction and allow me to just create some space to get to work on myself. So specifically to your question, what are some things you can do? I think one, having in general a very productive morning routine that allows you to show up, that like when your uh, child wakes up, when your wife wakes up, and I know when they're first born, this will be a little bit trickier, but on down the road when they're sleeping a little bit more, like they wake up and you're on point.
mm,
Like they wake up and you've already been working on yourself. Most of us do not. I do not wake up and spring out of bed and the world is rainbows and butterflies. I mean, there's some days that I wake up and I don't want to do the work. I don't want to do these things, but I take myself through the process, and by the time I'm done, I'm a whole new man. And
mm,
I can
mm,
show up and be patient, present, positive with my family, but it's because I intentionally put myself there. Working out as a husband, father, leader is one of the best ways to get stress out. You can take that to destructive levels like I did, but working out is still a massive part of my routine. and it just gets the blood flowing. It gets all kinds of feel good hormones flowing. I think that's really big. I spend time in prayer, meditation, journaling every day. Actually have started writing gratitude notes to myself, which is interesting. And I think that that's something that most people would probably not consider, but it's a pretty powerful practice. But here's the one to really pay attention to. Every morning, I write my son, my daughter, and my wife a short note of love, honor, gratitude, or appreciation
Hmm.
every day.
Wow. Wow.
So it's quick. I mean, it doesn't take me more than 5 minutes. So it's not, I'm not writing them a big long letter. It's a quick note, not a letter. And what I actually do is I'll pull up like a Word document. I'll go find 3 pictures, one of me and my daughter, one of me and my son, one of me and my wife, or maybe the whole family. And I paste those at the top, print it out, cut it into 3 equal little slices of note with a picture at the top. We've all heard of pictures worth 1,000 words. So I connect an actual moment through a picture to this little note. And then I will write to my wife what I love about her. I will write to my daughter what I appreciate about her. I will write to my son what I respect about him. Just super short and fast.
Wow.
And I give that to them every day. And I actually go into this in pretty good depth in the one of my podcast episodes. But here's the thing: it's not for them; it's for you first.
Hmm.
It and this is my analogy. If you wear glasses, or if you buy a pair of glasses, on day one when you put them on, they're completely crystal clear. That's no different than the day you get married or the day that you hold your child for the first time. That day one, you were looking at them through these crystal clear lenses. But then wearing those glasses for a couple of days, you notice there's a couple of smudges on there. Another couple of weeks go by, and there's a little bit of dirt. A few months go by, they're a little bit dirty. If you haven't cleaned them in a year, those glasses literally distort your perception of reality. And what this practice does, which I'll call it a tool, I will call it a practice. It is a way for you to clean the lens through which you see your family every single morning.
Damn, that's powerful.
It's massively powerful. What we have now is this drawer in my home, and it is literally got probably 4,000 notes in it because
Wow.
I've been doing this for years now. I know that if I die today, one of the most valuable things that my family will have, they will pull that drawer out and they will have thousands of notes that tell them how much I love them and what I think
Wow.
about them. And the other thing it does is talking about mindset, right? I implant into my conscious daily through writing these notes that I love my wife. I'm not frustrated with her. I love and honor my children. I'm not bothered by them, right? I'm ingraining that positivity into my mind. I'm cleaning the lens through which I serve them and see them. And then when you do this and give it to them, it makes it a lot harder to snap at your wife or your kids when you just wrote them this nice note.
It's true.
And so that honestly is one of the most cherished routines that I have committed to in my morning. And it shifts my entire day. And when I miss one, I can feel it. It's not, again, it's not about them. I don't give this to them and expect them to appreciate it, reciprocate, or say, "Oh yeah, I got that letter and thank you so much." Like, they may say nothing. That it's not for them, it's for you.
Hmm.
It's not about them, it's not an exchange, it's a gift. No strings attached, and I give it to them whether they appreciate it or not, because really I'm just giving it to myself.
That's amazing. Wow, you're setting a high standard now.
But
That is
again,
awesome.
these little things though, it's like,
Oh yeah.
in if I'm out of town, and this is amazing for people who travel, if I'm out of town, I'll do a quick 30-second just video to them. Record a 30-second video. Hey kids, hey sweetie, I'm thinking about you. I miss you. Can't wait to be home. Just want you to know I'm thinking of you and I love you. And here you go. And I'll fire that off and I'm done. It took 30 seconds. So we're plenty to do, I know. But if you don't have 30 seconds to make a little daily deposit into your family, then you need to reprioritize your time.
So from somebody that was really struggling with an identity to now that's leaving a legacy is, I think that's freaking awesome, man. Like to hear your journey and to hear these tools that you've developed, and now you're developing your own tools, which is
Developing
just
them. I mean,
insane.
I don't feel like I can take credit for that. You know, I've just been blessed and fortunate to find, and I realized I answer a question earlier that I'll go back to. Um, I have been fortunate to find these tools that we are not readily given or told even exist,
Right.
but from a place of desperation, I searched for them.
Mm,
And I can't quite put into words how good I feel today. I mean, you talk about pursuing happiness. I find I find that or I believe that I have found happiness and that I get to pursue that growth and that happiness like every single day. There's still challenges that, I mean, running a business is still got all kinds of pressure, all kinds of challenge. Being married is not easy for anybody. If they told you that it was, then they're checked out. Raising kids is a challenge. I mean, just life is challenging, but what has changed is not all the external pressure. It's not that everything outside of me got easy. It's that internally my capacity has grown so much that it has far surpassed the pressure that I find myself under. And now I actually seek out ways to add pressure because I know that's how I'm going to grow to the next phase.
awesome.
But you
Wow.
did ask earlier, how do you find a coach? I started off with Tony Robbins. I think the most important thing is not necessarily who you coach with, but that you start, because it's like anything. You can find someone who's very inexpensive. You can find someone who's a fortune. I think the more you pay, the more you get out of it, not just because you're probably working with a higher level coach, but because the more you're able to pay is the more leverage you get on yourself to do the
Mm,
work.
hmm
If you there's going to be difference between $50 an hour, $500 an hour, and $5,000 an hour. I've never paid 5,000 an hour for anything, but just to illustrate, like if you spent $50 on an hour of training, you would get $50 worth of value. If you spent 5,000, you would be completely present and probably do every single thing that you were
Oh
told to
yeah.
do because you just got like massive leverage on yourself by how much money you paid. So you can truly do like a Google search. I would strongly urge people to look at someone who's got a mindset coaching perspective, not just your run of the mill life coach, but truly someone who understands the mind and mindset and how that impacts and influences us.
Love that. I want to be respectful of your time, but I have one more question if you don't mind.
Please,
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you. You said your biggest regret was not taking time off. I want to talk about that because I feel like we're all caught up in this rat race of work. And um, I think now that the world is like digital, like a lot of us are working from home and we're just stuck in our offices and we can't turn off our phones. We're always connected. I want to talk about that real quick because I think it's a problem that definitely exists in me, my family, many other families that we feel tethered to our workplaces like we owe them something. You know, life goes by and I don't want to be 80, 90 years old on my deathbed thinking like all this time I spent working and I missed out all my kids' stuff and stuff. My wife for traveling and making experiences. I just want you to hit on that, like why that's your biggest regret and how you would handle that.
you know, I regret that I didn't take a stand for myself and what I wanted in that space.
Hmm.
I also give myself some forgiveness and some grace, realizing where I was. But if I could go back, I would have taken a stand and said, the business will figure itself out. I don't get a second chance at spending these first few days with my son and my wife in this time. And especially considering what we had to go through in order to have our children.
Yeah.
Um, that is something that I regret. I think men, and I keep saying men, so I apologize to any ladies who I, absolutely respect. Like I'm just used to speaking to men. And so
Mhm.
that's kind of my filter that I think through, but no one's going to give you the permission to do this. And often I have found that it's not until I give myself permission to actually take a stand for what I want. Like I had to give myself permission to hire that first coach. On that, I saw so little value in myself. I spent, I think, for an entire year of coaching, I spent like $4,000 on that first coach. And in my mind, it's like, well, this is probably the worst business decision I'm ever going to make. And we're probably going to go out of business because of this, which is laughable.
Mm.
It is a joke. I mean, I was worth so much more. Your life is too valuable to give away to things that don't fulfill you and don't bring you joy. And your family and the time with them is fleeting and will go by fast. And we hear it all the time that the kids grow up fast, will be out the door. But I think we're so reluctant to give ourselves permission. I really do.
Mm.
How many times I just haven't given myself permission. There was no one really holding me back the way I'm holding myself back. So maybe it's a
Wow.
tough conversation. Maybe it's not that easy to get out of because you do have a job, do have demands, all these things. I get that and realize it, but you do have to get to a place where you say, okay, well, what's going to give? Is it going to be my family that pays the price? Or am I going to take a stand for what I want, give myself permission to actually want that and do what's required or do everything I can, whatever that may be. And so, you about to step into to a space of being a new father, just cherish that time because it goes by quick and it's a whirlwind and you don't want to miss it.
Mm.
And you deserve, your child deserves, your wife deserves you being willing to have enough value in yourself to give yourself permission to be present for that space and that time.
Appreciate that. Frankly, I think this is a good place to wrap this up. However, you're welcome back anytime because I feel like there's just so much more we can dive into along your journey.
This was a
Um,
blast. I'm having so much fun, and
awesome.
I just hope that someone gets a little value out of this today.
How can
And
they not? This is crazy. I mean, this is
yeah,
crazy, man. I mean, I've definitely had some conversations where some people come from dark places and they lift themselves up. You were in like darkest of dark, and to hear how happy you are today, like a complete 180, literally a complete 180, and you have so much to give. I love that, and you take the time to share your experience and the tools you've learned along the way, and you're happy to do it, and you're coming from a place where your cup is completely full. You practice what you preach. Um, where can people follow you? Where can people find you, listen to you? Give us the goods.
yeah, man. So I did start a podcast, kind of behind that whole
I can see
idea of just
why.
yeah. I just want to share my story and what I've found because it's not easily available. And so I'm really trying to just share, here's all the tools and the things I've found to bring and restore order to my life. And they have. I
Mm.
mean, like you can judge it and say whatever you want about it, but I just know internally, like I feel so good today that I have a hard time putting it into words. And
And
it's
that's
like,
all that
man,
matters.
it's like I didn't realize, I had no idea I could feel this good. I had
Mhm.
no idea joy was this would feel this great. So if they want to follow, they can absolutely go to the podcast. It's called The World Needs Men. The world needs
That's
healthy
awesome.
men who can show up as healthy fathers, husbands, leaders. And we dive in there. And then I'm also on Instagram at The World Needs Men.
That's awesome. Franklin, thank you so much. Like I said, come back anytime. Come back and we can talk about fatherhood. How's
I
that sound?
appreciate that, Ryan. Yeah, best of luck to you stepping into this new season. Thank you so much for having me on. This was a true pleasure and just a blast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.